my friends, it's Joel. It's time for Summit, fourth Sunday in Ordinary Time. Still acknowledging the Packers are in the playoffs, at least at the time I recorded this video, which is the Friday before these games actually happen, before the Packers and Buccaneers play. So when you watch this, that game's over. We know who's going to the Super Bowl, and this video might age horribly in that regard. But you know what doesn't age horribly? The word of the Lord. How's that for a transition? We're jumping into the readings this week, and I got to ask you a question as we get started. Who is the authority, or what is the authority in your life? When we think of authority, that word conjures up authoritarian figures, maybe. People who give us rules that we have to follow. Maybe we have different feelings about authority. Our leaders, teachers, parents, coaches, politicians, whatever. Maybe we agree with those authorities. Maybe we struggle with those authorities. As we grow up, we find ourselves sometimes butting heads with authority as we try to make our own way and come up with a value system and test the waters a little bit to find out what these rules are all about. That's a part of growing up, and it's a part of being a person, asking questions of authority. But what is authority? The word has this negative connotation sometimes, but an authority is actually something we model our life off of, or we model decisions off of. If somebody says, well, that doctor is an authority on the matter, it means that we need to base our opinions or our decisions off of what that doctor is saying. They've studied. They're the authority. They have sort of this creative ownership over this idea, and so we model decisions off of them. If we say, the church is an authority on moral teachings, it means that we model our moral understanding off of the church. They are a legitimate holder of this thing. The root word in authority comes in where we talk about an author. An author is the originator, the creator of a work. It's where we also get like authentic. And to be authentic is to be a legitimate copy of a creator. So if we say, well, that's an authentic work from this famous author, it means that author worked on that particular thing, or that signature is authentic. It really came from this creator. To be authentic people then means that we actually are modeled off of our creator. We're living into who God created us to be. So authority is the thing we model ourselves off of, that we base our life from. So who is the authority in your life? Let's jump to the first reading. In the Book of Deuteronomy, Moses is in the middle of a speech he's giving to the Israelites before they cross into the Promised Land. We've said this before on Summit, but it's worth reviewing. Moses never gets into the Promised Land. He leads the Israelites for 40 years in the wilderness, but he has this one moment of doubt, of faithlessness in God's action. And Moses, who has seen God face to face, or as one sees God face to face, that's a big break in the relationship. And so Moses never enters into the Promised Land. So before they cross over into the land of Canaan, Moses is giving this speech to the Israelites. He's giving them sort of this final last lecture and instructions. And that's what we get today, where Moses is saying, there is going to one day be a prophet like me. But until that time happens, be very careful about people who come speaking as though they have authority from God or from me. He's giving caution because people are going to want to misuse Moses' teaching or claim that they speak in the authority of Moses in order to make decisions and legislation. Sometimes that can be bad. We all know a situation and probably can call to mind something where one person said they were speaking on behalf of another, whether that was another person or even a higher power like God, and that person was not a legitimate authority for that person. They weren't a good representative, and they wound up distorting and even hurting the teaching of that person. So Moses is cautioning them against that sort of thing. We're going to skip the second reading for a second and hop over to the gospel, because here we have Jesus, who is the prophet like Moses and so much more. Jesus is the fulfillment of who Moses was, because Moses is a mediator, okay? Moses goes up to the mountain on behalf of the Israelites to receive the Ten Commandments, to talk with God. The Israelites actually request this. They don't want to come too close to God. They're afraid of what that could do to them. So Moses is this mediator. And Moses as mediator is not divine, but Jesus as mediator is fully human and fully divine. So he's a perfect mediator and also a perfect authority. So when he's teaching and when he's healing, people are astounded and they feel something different. You ever feel something different with particular authority figures? Ask yourself that. Why are there some people who are in a position of authority who we just immediately respect, we gravitate to, we say, yeah, that's a person I can listen to and obey and follow. And other people were like, I don't know. Jesus has that sense People just are like, wow, this is a teaching, a new teaching even, different than the Pharisees with authority. See, the Pharisees aren't good authorities for Moses, but they claim to be. Now you have Jesus who's fulfilling the law and who is this new authority. So people say, wow, new teaching with authority. He commands unclean spirits. There's something about this guy. Let's hop back to the second reading now, because the second reading, like last week, if we take it literally, seems a little bit weird, right? Talking about, it's better not to marry. It's husbands, like avoid, or men avoid getting a wife avoid getting a husband, be anxious about things of the Lord. And again, St. Paul isn't saying here specifically, hey, don't marry. That's a vocation that many people are called to in order to raise holy families for the good of their spouses, help your spouse be holy, raise children, raise holy children, if that is something that God has in the plan for your marriage. Those are great things. What St. Paul is getting at here, though, is in marriage, there is a temptation that doesn't exist when we are outside of marriage. But the temptation exists in a different way outside of marriage. So stick with me here, because a lot of you are single, probably not married, and so that's gonna relate to you. In marriage, the temptation is to make your spouse the authority, to be concerned about what makes them happy, to be worried about what's going to make that person love you, to be concerned about their needs. Now, don't get me wrong, in marriage, as a married person, that's important. You want to be concerned about those things. But if you make your spouse the highest authority in your life, well, that's a problem. Now, I'm going to caution you with this as probably young single folks. If you are looking ahead to marriage and you're making the pursuit of marriage or romance your highest authority, you're doing it wrong. And sometimes we can have this almost idolization of what marriage we think it's supposed to be. Like, marriage is going to fulfill all of my desires. Marriage is going to make me happy. If I find somebody who truly loves me and accepts me for who I am, then I will love and accept myself for who I am. And sometimes in the church, we don't do a great job of painting marriage for what it is. We paint it as sort of this lifetime movie where you pray for your future spouse, and that's not a bad thing, or you think about your future spouse all the time, or you're concerned about finding your future spouse and discerning the vocation of marriage. And we forget that that thing, marriage, it's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to make you fulfilled. Your relationship with the Lord does that. In fact, the most fulfilling marriages happen with people who are chasing the Lord as disciples first, who are concerned about the authority of God in their life versus first pleasing their spouse or the authority of their spouse. Now, there's a hierarchy here because we've got to please and seek the love of God first. And then when we're fulfilled and we love ourselves, we can give ourselves to another. But sometimes we get it twisted. And St. Paul is talking to the Corinthians, people who have just come to know Christ and maybe idolized marriage a little bit too, and saying, listen, you have to be aware that your spouse is not the highest authority in your life. Now, maybe your spouse would like to be, but they're not. The pursuit of this thing, and we could broaden it to all vocational callings, is not the highest authority in your life. God is. Even folks who are single, that's many of you, even folks who are priests or religious, can fall trapped to this. That personal vocational calling is not the end-all be-all. Your walk of discipleship is, and that's what feeds a vocational calling. Because the walk of discipleship makes Christ the authority, and that feeds the vocation, which then allows us to grow in holiness. But if we get it backwards, and we start to think about the demands of the moment and my vocation and my state of life now, that gets us out of order. So for you as young single folks, you've got to ask yourself, am I idolizing romance or romantic pursuits? Am I idolizing other things in my life? Sports, particular hobbies, academics, my friend group, the opinion or the approval of my parents? Are those the highest authority in my life? Am I seeking to please those things before I seek to please God and do what is holy? Because sometimes those things overlap, right? But sometimes they don't. And when they stand in contradiction, you've got to ask yourself, who am I modeling my decisions? What am I modeling my decisions off of? And is it something that is a teaching with true authority that only comes from the Lord? That's the question to ponder in this fourth Sunday of Advent as we think about authority, as we think about Moses sending the Israelites into the promised land, as we think about Jesus as a new teaching with authority as the true mediator between God and man, as true God and true man, and we think about what that means practically for our life in the second reading. And we think about a little bit, after all of that, some football and the games this weekend. And I'll see you back here next week then, and we'll find out what all happens as we get into the fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time back here on Summit.